If you're here for the first time, we've been looking at complex trauma. So normally trauma is looked at as a one-time event. Complex trauma is rather new in understanding people, and it's trauma that goes on and on. It's when a child or a person is living in an environment that they perceive as dangerous, where they could get hurt and they don't see a solution. What we saw last time is that trauma begins to affect how I cope, so that in a normal, healthy family, as a child develops and is exposed to danger and the challenges of life, parents are supposed to be there to teach them how to deal with it, give them tools. In a home that inflicts trauma, the child is living, feeling danger. They're walking on eggshells. They're always guarded, looking over their shoulder, never feeling that they can relax. But nobody's helping them know how to deal with this stuff. And it doesn't seem that there's a solution to the danger that will make it safe again. And so what the child is forced to do is really go into survival mode. And survival mode is, how can I keep from getting hurt because I can't get out of this dangerous situation? I can't run away. I can't fight back. And how do I get my needs met? And so they begin to develop ways that seem to work. And those are ways of coping, but after they begin to grow into adulthood, they realize that the things they thought were helping them cope are actually making their life more difficult. They're now causing more problems. And so now, instead of being wounded by other people, they're wounding themselves. That's the outcome of that. Now, something you may not have thought of, but it might be interesting for you to think about and might be depressing for you. Mostly when people ask you, how old are you? You give them your belly button age, okay? The date you were born, and that's how old you are. What I want you to think about is that at the age you stopped coping in a healthy way and started coping in unhealthy ways, you stopped growing emotionally as far as coping. So you might be 50 belly button age, but you might be 10 when it comes to coping ability, your coping age. And then you might still grow a little bit through all of that, but once you found drugs and alcohol, you said, I have just found the best way in the world to cope with life. You stop growing, period, at that age. And so your belly button age could be very, very different from your emotional age. And so the first thing that I want you to understand is what trauma does is it kind of freezes you at that age where you started to survive in unhealthy ways. Okay, last week I told you that what comes out of all the research being done on people with complex trauma is that they begin to survive and they develop 50 characteristics. And those characteristics we started to look at, and we looked at 17 characteristics that relate to how you cope. And a few people came up to me and said, I checked off all 17. Where's my star kind of approach. Tonight I want to give you 7 more. And they're a little more involved. And then next week we're going into how does complex trauma affect the way I approach relationships, and you're going to get another list of characteristics. But for today, we'll start with number 18, and that is complex trauma always results in you as a child feeling false guilt. Now, let me explain it. You might have had a dad who was angry and he was drunk, and he said, I drink because you're such bad kids. And all of a sudden you feel guilty. If I wasn't such a bad kid, my dad wouldn't be drinking, so his drinking is my fault. And so what you've done is you've accepted responsibility for something that really isn't your fault, but you've taken it on because you've been told it's your fault. And that you begin to learn and it gets reinforced. I've heard clients tell me that when their parents separated or divorced, they said, "We're divorcing because you kids are so hard to deal with." And the kids are walking around saying, "We're the cause of our parents' divorce." Imagine the guilt you'd carry. And I've had many clients, not just one or two, who've had a parent who, let's say their mom died giving birth to them, and their dad said, "You killed your mom." And they've been forced to carry that. So that's false guilt. Now let me just develop that, because what comes out of that is that you begin to feel that you're responsible for the decisions and the emotions of other people. And so if you get in a relationship and your partner is sad or angry, you think, "I must have did something wrong." So you're running around trying to make them happy again, thinking it's your responsibility and you're the cause of their anger, and you take on that guilt. Now let me just show you what happens with that and why I throw it into the coping thing. If you get in a relationship and somebody learns that about you, that you have lots of false guilt, they go, "Bingo, I have just found the perfect tool to manipulate this person." And guess what happens in trauma-based families? So let's say you grew up where mom or dad learned how to manipulate you through false guilt, and now you're in recovery, and they say, "Come on over for the long weekend. We're going to have a little thing." And you say, "You know what? I got plans. I'm doing recovery stuff." And guess what they do? "After all we've done for you, you should be ashamed of yourself. The sacrifices we've made, and you can't even come over?" Or you might get a phone call from dad to say, "You know, your answer really hurt your mom. She can't even talk to you right now. She's crying so much." And what are you doing? "Okay, throw all my plans out the window. I got to trot off to mommy and daddy's because I'm feeling guilty." Wow, they've got the perfect tool for manipulating. And so that is a big issue for a lot of people. Next one that comes up, anger. As I deal with people that come out of trauma, I usually will ask them, how much anger do you have? And I do a scale of 1 to 10. And I get some people that are kind of have insight into themselves, and they say, "I'm always about a 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm an angry person. It's always bubbling below the surface." And I'll get other people to say, "I don't got any anger." And as I begin to work with them, they go, "Whoa, my anger just jumped to a 9. Where did that come from?" And I go, "It's always been there. You've just stuffed it so well." And so what we know is that people coming out of trauma have lots of anger issues. And let me see if I can explain that to you, because it's such a big issue when it comes to coping. When you get to people that would say, "I don't have any anger," or "I know I have lots of anger," their approach still to anger is, "I need to keep it stuffed down because I'm afraid if I ever express my anger, I'm afraid of what would happen. And so I got to keep kind of the lid on my anger because there's so much there." And then if you are in recovery from addiction, you know that anger is one of the biggest triggers that causes you to say, "Screw everything, I'm out of here, I'll show you, I'll go get drunk, and that'll make you sorry you did what you just did." And so anger is a huge part of getting in the way of a healthy recovery if you don't deal with it. So where does that anger come from? If you grew up in a home that was marked by trauma, usually dad was allowed to be angry, or mom was allowed to be angry, but nobody else was. I don't know if you had that. And so you basically, if you showed anger, you got punished for it, and you were told you're a bad kid. So you begin to think anger's bad. I have to keep it stuffed because if I'm angry, people won't like me. And so you keep it stuffed down there. But what I have found with people who have stuffed their anger, it still sneaks out even as a child. And it's a very, very common thing for people coming out of trauma that they have cruelty to animals or they become bullies. They find somebody weaker than them and they vent their anger. They lash out at them. They may feel guilty after, or they just might harden their heart to any feelings of guilt at all. And so if anything violates love, and what that can be is they do something that's disrespectful, so it violates respect, or they do something that isn't honest, so they violate honesty or faithfulness, or they do something that's unfair and violates justice. So what are some of the first words out of a kid's mouth? It's not fair. And that's that built-in radar that says this is not a healthy environment. Stuff is happening that is not right or healthy. And so anger kicks in, and its purpose is to correct it, to give you energy to fight for what is right, to change circumstances so that they're healthy. But if you grew up in trauma, guess what you got? All kinds of things on a daily, weekly basis that violated love, respect, truth, and justice. You were surrounded by that. You then expressed anger about those circumstances, and you were punished. And you were told you were bad, and so what you had to do was stuff all of that anger down, even though it was a healthy response. Now let me apply that to you, okay? As I work with addicts in recovery, guess what hot buttons cause their anger to flare the fastest? Anything that's disrespect, anything that's not fair, violates justice, and anything that violates truth or faithfulness. Man, you just show a sign of disrespect and you got an explosion happening. And so what you, I hope, can be aware of is you've got all of that stuff that's been stuffed down that was based on a healthy response to anger, and now it is something that really pushes your buttons big time, and that can cause you to go from 0 to 100 in a nanosecond. And that's the problem when it comes to coping, that if you don't start to look at this, anger will just take you out and really do a lot of damage. The other thing that can happen for a lot of people is once they feel anger, and so let's say somebody cheats on you legitimately, not just in your head, and you're jealous about it, or somebody lies to you and you get angry about it. If you were raised with false guilt, what many would then do would say, oh, I shouldn't be angry. I just blew it. I'm angry. And so you start to turn your anger on yourself. You start to beat yourself up. And people will say over and over again, it's my fault. I must have done something wrong. I'm a terrible person. And they get the whip out in their head and start whipping themselves. Anger that goes crazy on themselves. One of the dangers in anger is we think that anger is just the person that explodes and starts yelling and throwing things and hitting things. Do you realize that probably that's the minority of people that have anger issues? Most anger issues are very sneaky. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're angry at your partner. So they come home from work and they go, how was your day? And you give them the silent treatment, or you give them one-word answer, fine. Something bothering you? Nope. Want to talk about it? Nope. What are you doing? You are punishing them. You're venting anger without them hopefully figuring it out. Well, they're figuring it out, and they say, are you angry at me? Nope. And they're not getting an answer, so they start getting angry. And then what do? You go, you got an anger problem. You should deal with it. And you walk around saying, ain't I cool? I just made it all his fault and made him the problem. and I look like a little saint here with my nose in the air, rubbing his in you know what. So that's what easily happens. So bottom line, anger for many people prevents any chance of healthy coping. Next one that comes out of complex trauma. Oppositional defiance. They now have a term in psychology, a designation that is being given to children called oppositional defiant disorder. I don't know if you've been diagnosed or your children, but here's really what it is. It's really a response to complex trauma. So think of it this way. You have to weigh out the control of a parent versus the independence of a child. So when the child is a baby, it is totally dependent, so the parent is in total control. Only for a little while, and then the kid learns how to cry and get parents to do what they want. But the point is that the parent is in total control. If it's a healthy home, as the child gets older, the parent lessens the amount of control they exercise and give the child more independence, more freedom to make decisions, okay? What happens if that parent is a control freak? What happens maybe if that parent is you and you've come out of drugs, out of prostitution, out of jail, and you're saying, my kid is not going down the same road. I will make sure of it. Guess what you just became? A control freak. And so your kid gets 8, 9, 10. You're still controlling every decision. You're not allowing them to make any decisions. And there's something inside of them that has a little antenna that senses, I should be making some decisions now. I should be able to choose whether I wear shorts or long pants, black socks or green socks, but mom won't even let me do that. So what a child does in order to try to make a bit of space to grow up is push back from mom or dad. And what do we then say? That's a rebellious child. But it's not necessarily a rebellious child. It's a child trying to grow up, and nobody's allowing him to. Now, here's where it gets to be a problem. Let's say you get into 13, 14, 15, 16. Now you're having yelling matches with mom. Now you come to blows at times with mom. Mom's still not going to let you make any decisions. She tries to run your life. And so then you end up in addiction. And what you basically do in your head is if mom says, do this, I will do the exact opposite. Because I hate my mom. I hate her control. I will not do what she says. So you end up in addiction, and mom comes to you and says, you know what? I think you should go to Finding Freedom. It could be the smartest decision in the world, the wisest, best thing for you. Well, what does oppositional defiance say? Nope, because mom made it. Mom made that suggestion, and it doesn't matter what the suggestion was. It's who made the suggestion. That's all that matters. And so you end up saying, I'm not going to go for help simply because mom suggested it, and you keep on in self-destruct mode. And so most people that come out of trauma have issues with authority, and if you had a control freak parent, you develop this oppositional defiance, which puts you in places where you make bad decisions just to do the opposite of the person you don't like. Not a good idea. And then if you get married or you get in a relationship and your spouse says you should do this, you go down the same road because I'm not doing what anybody tells me to do. I'm my own boss, blah, 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 and I'm sitting here at my bottom because I'm my own boss. And it blows up in your face. Okay, the next one. Many kids, when they begin to realize that they're not able to change their circumstances, to improve their circumstances, to make them safer, they escape into a fantasy world. And I wouldn't say this is for everybody that comes out of trauma, but this is what I am finding to be more and more common than was originally thought. So let me give you a couple scenarios. The child maybe lives in a life of chaos, and they go into their bedroom and they shut the door, and their bedroom, everything is in place. They kind of develop an OCD for having everything in place and ordered and structured and neat, and that's their escape, okay? Other kids go into their room and they just escape to a fantasy world. And that fantasy world could be a perfect family where they imagine a mom and dad that loves them, brothers and sisters that love them, and they create this family in their mind. Others, they go into the fantasy world of just reading novels where you have knight in shining armor and all these happily ever after stories, or watching movies. And it takes them out of the trauma. It makes life for a little while seem loving and nice and safe. Now, maybe you did it, maybe you didn't, but let me show you what can happen today. If you've developed a skill or an ability to cope by escaping into fantasy, and you meet Joe Blow and he's really nice to you, what have you already trained your mind to do? On go the rose-colored glasses, on go the fantasy mind, and I've got Mr. Knight in shining armor that has just shown up on a silver steed, and he is perfect. And you get friends that say, come out of your fantasy, this guy's got problems. No, in my fantasy, he's perfect. So here's what happens. You fall in love with the fantasy of the person, not the person. And you make excuses for it. And after you get beat up a whole bunch of times, finally you begin to go, maybe I have a fantasy of this guy, not the truth. But it's hard to give that up. Big issue. Okay, next. What happens when people come with a fantasy thing is it's really difficult to live in the here and the now. So when you're in life right now, you might say, too many problems, too boring, I will escape. And you go into a fantasy world so you don't have to live in the here and now and accept the circumstances as they are. Other thing that happens with it is a lot of people come into recovery and they develop a fantasy recovery. They have a pink cloud, and all of a sudden they've got in their mind, there's a magic pill. All I got to do is find this little magic pill, and I am going to just breeze through recovery. I'll be fixed. There won't be any work. It'll be smooth. Everything will be wonderful. Britt, can you turn me down just a tad there? And the final thing about this fantasy thing is a tendency, and that is when you meet somebody. So let's say you meet me, and you say, I like this guy. You put me on a pedestal. That's what fantasy is about. And then I make one mistake in your life, and I go from being an angel to being Satan himself. And so you're putting people on a pedestal and knocking them off almost as quickly. And so you have a great difficulty in seeing people accurately. That leads to the next one. Unrealistic expectations come out of trauma. Because what happens when you live in trauma is you're not sure what normal looks like. You're not sure what a healthy family looks like. And so you begin to go through your life and you go, this must be a normal family. And then you go to your friend's house after school and everybody's nice to each other and nobody's screaming and throwing things. And you go, what a weird family that they're so quiet and something's wrong here. And then you begin to realize, oh, we're the weird family. Everybody else is a little more normal. But then you go, well, then what's normal? Now, here's typically what can happen with that is some people have a swinging pendulum. So if you grew up in a family where there's anger, and from one of your parents, you will say, anger's bad, I hate anger, I don't want any anger. So you go into your relationship saying, if this relationship is healthy, nobody will ever get angry. And guess what happens with that? Everybody walks around stuffing their anger, everybody trying to be fake and phony to each other until there's a huge explosion, and then everybody's guilty. And it doesn't help in healthy relationships. The other thing that happens, you come into recovery with unrealistic expectations that can go, you know what, if I'm doing my recovery well, then I'm always going to be happy, and I won't have any problems. I'll just coast, because if I'm doing my recovery well, everything's going to be good. I'll never have a bad day. I won't struggle for more than a few minutes, and then I'll find a magic pill, and everything will be good again. And you go into that, and you come to a bad day, and you go, what's the point? This sucks. This is too much work. And it's all based on unrealistic expectations. Next one. I see this all the time. People come in recovery. They get a month under their belt, and they go running back to family and friends saying, trust me now. I'm doing my recovery. Trust me. And the family's going, whoa, whoa, whoa. We've been down this road. You always say you're going to be different this time. We're going to keep some boundaries here, and you're all mad at everybody. Why? Because your expectations don't match reality from their point of view. And then a lot of people come into recovery, and they go, I'm doing really well. Mom and Dad should validate that now. So you run off to Mom and Dad, say, look how well I'm doing in recovery. And they go, and you're all mad at Mom and Dad. You're crushed. And why? Because you expect people to now validate you because you're trying. And then the final one that I see a lot that happens is, I'm doing really well in recovery. So Mom, you should start working on yourself. Dad, you should start working on yourself. Boyfriend, you should start working on. Everybody, we're going to all work together. And you're expecting everybody to say, wow, wonderful. Let's jump on. We want what you got. And nobody does. And you walk around all crushed. And then the final one that I see is, I'm doing well. I'm going to treat you so-so, but you have to treat me perfectly. And what I tell people all the time is, when you come into recovery, you don't move out of a very unhealthy environment into a totally perfect, healthy environment. You're in recovery with a lot of other people that are struggling with the same issues. So if you expect everybody to now treat you perfectly, you got another thing coming to you. People just don't change because you want them to and become perfect. Okay, big issue. Okay, next thing that comes out of, and I'll try to wrap this up, double standard. So if you think of growing up in a home where dad's angry, but nobody else can be angry. He can accuse mom of being unfaithful, but mom can never challenge him that he's unfaithful. So double standard. What can happen as you then come into relationships in adult life is you kind of adopt that double standard thing. And so it's, you have to treat me with respect, but I don't have to treat you with respect. I can go through your cell phone, you can't go through my cell phone. You have to tell me every detail of your day, no secrets, and I don't have to tell you a thing about my day. Always the mark of a complex trauma environment. And if you want a sure way to wreck a relationship, stick to a double standard. Final one, distorted thinking. If you go back to dad saying, I drink because you're a bad kid, or dad saying, you want to play baseball, don't be so selfish, all of dysfunctional families or complex trauma families are based on distorting reality. But as a kid, you think you're being told the truth. And so you learn, you develop a brain that's able to twist what's happening and distort it. That causes big problems. So let me just give you a couple examples. Faulty logic. So this would be, and you'll hopefully see the application, somebody that says it's rained for 4 days straight, that means it's going to rain for the rest of my life. What does that sound like in recovery? I've had 4 tough days, so that means that the rest of my recovery is going to be tough. What's the point? Okay? Nobody in my life, number 2, has been trustworthy so far. Therefore, nobody will ever be trustworthy. So don't even bother trying to trust. And that kind of logic makes sense when you've been there, but when you back away from it, you go, that's really kind of crazy thinking. One other faulty logic one, I've had a bad 2 hours, that means that the rest of my life is going to be bad. Okay, second one, emotional reasoning, and this one is huge. This one goes where you let how you're feeling tell you what is the truth about life. So let me give you an example. You text somebody, and they don't text you right back. What do you feel? Uh-oh, they've rejected me. And so your emotions are saying, they've rejected me because it feels like they've rejected me. And your brain goes, because you feel that way, it must be the truth. Meanwhile, they could be busy. But that's emotional reasoning, where your emotions begin to tell you that this must be the truth. Big one with boundaries is if you phone somebody and say, can I come over and talk to you? And you say, sorry, I'm busy right now. That feels like rejection. You're saying no to me. And so your brain says, if it feels like rejection, it must be rejection. So now you're not going to talk to that person anymore. You block them on Facebook. They're out of your life. Meanwhile, they have a busy day. But emotional reasoning did that. Disrespect. I tell the story that when I was growing up, if you wagged your finger, that meant you were making a point and nothing more. My wife grew up, if somebody wagged their finger at you, it meant you're bad. So we get married and we're having a heated discussion and I start wagging my finger. I'm making a point and she's getting mad at me. Why? Because she says, you're saying I'm bad. I said, no, I'm not saying you're bad. Yes, you are. I said, no, I'm making a point. So if you watch me when I talk, I never wag my finger. I wag half a finger. I beat that one. Or if you walk into a room and people are whispering, it goes, it feels like they're whispering about me, so they must be. That's emotional reasoning. A couple more around that one. Unfaithful. If your partner has cheated on you in the past, and let's say they've been faithful now for 10 years, and one night they phone you from work and say, I got to stop at Walmart on the way home, your heart sinks, and you go, it feels like they're cheating, so they must be. Final, very quickly, black and white extreme, and that is, if you're not totally 100% in agreement with everything I do, if you just challenge one thing, then you're my enemy. It's that cut and dry, one extreme or the other. Or to put it this way, if I'm not doing recovery perfectly, then I'm a total failure. That kind of extreme black and white thinking. And then finally, catastrophizing, which is simply you predict the worst case scenario. So your friend doesn't return your text. Your mind doesn't go, maybe they're busy. Your mind goes, worst case scenario, they hate me, want nothing to do with me. This friendship's over. I've been rejected. That comes out of trauma. Why? Because what happens in trauma is, if I see signs of danger, I need to be prepared for the worst. And then your brain switches. If I see signs of danger, I'm pretty sure the worst is going to happen. And so now you never try anything. Now you never take any risks because your brain says, danger, danger, therefore worst case will happen. You see how all of that messes up coping? Well, I don't know if you've checked all of them again tonight. You can let me know. I hope you can walk away from this and say, okay, point taken, I got a lot of stuff to work on, and I'm willing to start. That is my hope. Let's just pray. Father, again, I just pray that you would meet each person where they're at and just help them as they begin to understand the effects of the trauma in their life, and that they would begin to see really good growth happening. Amen.